Hey, we have an awesome podcast today. Today we have Eric Maul. Thanks for joining, Eric.
Hey, happy to be here.
And for those that might follow either Eric or I or both of us on LinkedIn, the genesis of us talking today actually came about from a LinkedIn post that Eric posted regarding tech debt. So this episode is likely going to be mostly about tech debt, and we have a little bit different views, maybe perspectives on tech debt. So that's going to be the focus for this episode for sure. I think we're going to have some good discussions. But to kind of just get to know Eric a little more, I guess what is your background, Eric, in terms of what you did before Salesforce, how you got into Salesforce, and where you are today?
Yeah. So thanks for having me. I think it's awesome to be able to bring that conversation that started on LinkedIn and have a proper avenue to dedicate time, because we were talking earlier, there's only so much time that we can, or so many characters we can put in on a LinkedIn response. Um, for those that don't know me, my name's Eric Mahl. I'm the Vice President of Revenue Operations and Digital Transformation at Lens Financial. Been in the ecosystem for 15 years. My background was originally sales and marketing. And like many folks that are probably going to be listening to this, I was bit by the accidental admin bug and became Salesforce administrator at an organization where I was doing marketing for, and really started learning a lot more about that and chose to pursue a life of independent consulting as a Salesforce expert, and grew quite a bit on that. Started my own consulting practice in 2013, hired several employees. We were several employees deep up until 2018, 2019. Took a break, came back to independent consulting again, and then joined the client side in 2021, I believe it was, and been client side ever since. Basically, as a senior director CRM for an HR tech company, large organization. I mean, 1,800 users, and now getting to do it again at a much smaller organization with 50 users for now, and growing. But the one key thing in this technical debt discussion is that I'm not a developer. I've never wrote a single line of code that made it to a production environment, and believe me, that is a good thing. So just to set the stage, I've built quite a lot with regards to flows and declaratively. Worked a lot with developers, obviously recognizing my limitations and trying to have a good eye of when things are better dealt with code than trying to do it declaratively.
Awesome. So you've been around at least the block for a good 10 plus years in the Salesforce ecosystem, it sounds like.
Yeah, 15, I think now. Yeah, so it's been a minute.
Awesome. And I guess just even, I don't typically do this on the episodes, but just to give people my background and context, just for the discussion, that the unique one that we're having today. I started out managing as a software developer and managed software development teams and organizations for like large telecoms, Java, C++, C Sharp, etc. And then got into Salesforce around 2014, started a consultancy and have been a partner since then up until now. So that's my background. And then so I'm assuming when you went through those early stages of consulting, you probably hit some interesting projects and saw some interesting things. I'm assuming some rescue projects as well. Can you tell me about some of those challenges and projects?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, half, if not more of the times, we're there to fix someone else's mess. And ultimately, an implementation that went awry, whether they decided to self-implement or they hired a consulting company. One of the key things that I've learned throughout those years was that I've learned to cut slack to the companies that came before me, just because a customer comes to you and say, hey, come clean this up for me. They're coming up to you already in hindsight. So, there's a lot that I've learned in taking a look at it, but ultimately, a lot of implementations. I've worked with clients that, again, small orgs to fairly large orgs, especially before 2017. If there was any serious customization, it was done in some form of Apex or Visualforce, because declarative automation was very limited at the time. So having to deal with a lot of that. Yeah, a lot of experience kind of like being able to untangle wires and trying to steer the ship in the right direction.
Awesome. So I'm assuming a lot of those experiences contribute obviously to your thoughts on tech debt, the state of the ecosystem, um, and things along those lines. So I think to kind of jump into kind of where you and I met each other, there was a post that you did on LinkedIn which intrigued me, and you actually got a lot of response. I think there's right now 41 comments, 133 likes, and similar things. The post that you had was talking about tech debt. I think it started off saying, important reminder, everything you build will eventually become tech debt. And this is important for one big reason, paralysis by analysis. So I guess to start, can you kind of expand on that, on kind of what made you think of that, post it, and what your meaning and thoughts were behind that?
Yeah. So I think that throughout the several projects that I've gotten a chance to work with, and throughout, definitely well over 100 clients that I've come across, and talking to individuals and talking to folks, one of the things that uh, sometimes surprises me is the fact that folks um, say, "Hey, if we're gonna build this, let's build this right. Let's build this the proper way." And I'm in agreement of that. I think, as a starting thought process, I think that's a very important way to think about. The challenge is that there are other factors that eventually come into play when you try to apply that theory into real life. And I'm sure we'll get to talk about that. And for various of those factors, I think that anything that we build today will effectively become tech debt, where we can talk about the definitions and our own description of it, because I think that might be a crucial point to also clarify for those that are listening. But in some way or another, whether it's because of new technologies or new features being rolled out, or whether it's the fact that you had to make compromises because you were time bound by something, or something dramatically changes with the way the business operates, that changes its processes around that, whatever's built no longer supports it. Um, in in my understanding, there's all these external factors that can come in. If you try to plan and accommodate for all of them while you're solution designing for something right now, you may get yourself in a situation where you'll never design anything at all, or be able to go to market with anything at all, because you're just going to go into this waterfall type project that's just going to try to solve everything and ultimately solve nothing.
So, because I think the actual definition, I actually wrote it on paper.
Mm-hmm.
I don't write on paper a lot. So the official, right, Wikipedia one, is the tech debt is the cost of choosing a quick solution over a more efficient one in software development. So I guess from what you're saying is businesses move fast. Teams need to move fast. Salesforce teams need to move fast. Anything you build should typically be to get functionality out there, and not like what you mentioned, analysis by paralysis, but let's deliver value to the business. Let's assume it'll need to be fixed or modified, updated later on. Let's just kind of live with that assumption, because typically everything will end up getting either changed or fixed, or the business process might change. Is that kind of the angle you're coming from?
Yes, partially. I think several folks define tech debt different ways. I feel like we're all kind of swimming in the same direction, but what's in scope or out of scope for tech debt may change depending on folks' opinions. I think one of the key things to consider with tech debt is that, I very much subscribe to the idea that tech debt cannot be eliminated. It can only be mitigated. So you're going to run into a risk because of factors beyond it. Now, if I think ultimately we'll talk about the definition, go a little bit further in. If you're telling me that tech debt is defined by that point in time, are we building the best possible solution that we can build at this point in time? And if the answer is yes to that, then we have no tech debt. Then I agree. I think that's the way to do it, taking all the factors in. I think tech debt tends to encompass more than that. So, for example, if I look at something that I've built in 2017, where I'll go to my happy place in flows, where now flows are infinitely more powerful that they were, you can look at something that was that and be like, who was the idiot that built this way? And you could very easily come back and say, well, those were the tools that were available at the time. Now, the fact that even if declaratively, I can build that far more efficiently than I did, several years ago, that's still tech that needs to be addressed because, it may affect the performance of the org because of how many queries you're running on things or whatever the situation was. Those are all things that you have to take into consideration. So things that are not tech debt today can very well be, in my scope of what tech debt is, can very well become tech debt, in a week, in a month, in a couple of years.
So I think what you're saying is even if something is written perfectly, at some point, most things, if not almost all, will eventually, even if it's wasn't a quick solution, even if it was thoroughly documented, designed, it was the best possible solution at that time. At some point, it will become tech that I would assume it's something like, even like an example of Windows XP. Let's say your Windows XP runs perfectly. It's satisfying all your needs, but Microsoft is like, hey, you need to move to the Windows 10. Like, we're just kind of not doing Windows XP anymore, even though it runs well, it's perfect. Is it kind of a concept like that where eventually just things are going to change no matter, and nothing can stay working forever?
You would have had far more jokes open up if you went from Windows 10 to 11. 10 was the one that kind of worked.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yep. I was trying to think of the version numbers. Yep.
But I think that's one of the things. Equally, there are other constraints that we're talking about. For example, to keep in mind, like something time bound. So, for example, let's say you want to do this massive transformation of a customer service team, and you want to bring the customer service team on board to Salesforce that is already used by other departments in Salesforce or within the company. And for the sake of the argument, let's say that the legacy systems, the ERPs and the databases that have all of these customers are all across different databases. They're tracked differently. EMEA tracks unique identifiers for customers or account IDs differently than, or account numbers differently than the US folks, and like all of these different factors that you're looking at it as like, hey, we have to rethink about how we structure data, how we organize, how we catalog things if we want to properly do this together. But at the same time, you're time bound by when you need to deliver a solution by. And I think that, again, we can go further in the details of it's all fair and well of pushing back and trying to have a conversation, but ultimately you'll have a set of cards that you'll have to play with. You'll have a hand that you're given that you have to play with, and you're going to have to build something that sometimes you may need a compromise to be able to deliver on it. Where could it be done better? Yeah, absolutely. It could have been done better. But in that scenario, where at first we're talking about things that you build today that are perfect, that eventually become tech, that you could very well have to go to market with things today that inherently are already tech debt. And at that point, you're buying yourself, or you're setting yourself up for having to deal with that later in some way, shape, or form, or just by just kicking that can down the road a little bit further along.
Excuse me. I think one of the questions that someone asked in the LinkedIn thread, and it's similar to what you were talking about, or applies a little bit, is what if you build everything perfectly, but the business completely changes product line, services, and has to totally pivot to something completely new? Is the current system considered tech debt if the business changes? And I said no.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's
What
one of the
was your
interesting things. But tell me why. Tell me why you say no, because it's one of the interesting reasons why we're talking here.
right? Because back to like the official definition of taking shortcuts. Let's say you do build a stable, strong, well-designed, efficient, performing well Salesforce system, or just even any software system. I consider a change and a pivot that the business is doing, let's say changing product services, bolting on some other features that might either completely throw away everything that was built or significantly modify it. I consider that normal enhancements and progression of the system. where usually
Mhm.
has a capital budget. Usually those things are capital, not expense. I think budget plays a little bit into it as well. Typically, I consider anything capital, new requirements, new projects, and that's essentially what software development is. So if you have a good system, it's built right. The business wants to pivot or enhance or change XYZ. I consider that a continuation of the system and the platform, and you're continuing designing things, hopefully to scale, thinking through the design to keep the solution stable, scalable, performing well, etc., through those projects and budgets, instead of considering just because there's new requirements or the business is pivoting that what we built is tech debt.
So let's dive into that a little bit. The thought process, though, is I think that you used the key word that I like a lot, which is scalable. I think setting things up to be scalable is a crucial thing that separates those that have the experience, that have been through this and have familiarized themselves with the tools. And I think that has to be put into mind when you're going to build new solutions. The challenge being there is that, again, in this example that you're using, if a business pivots, the question is, can you still scale with what you have built? And how I see it is, if you can no longer scale with what you have built and you have to refactor, then that's tech debt. So, and you mentioned your definition of tech debt, or the one that you pulled, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's very much in line with most agile methodologies, and the agile methodology seems to really like that. Different folks have different definitions that are kind of more encompassing. So ultimately, I think you know that question of scalability plays a big factor on whether something becomes tech debt or not. That needs to be taken into consideration, or how you want to take it further.
I think I know what you're saying there, because back to the pivot. I mean, it's a fantastic example, because I think it's actually kind of common. The business pivots, you're stuck with a system that won't support what the pivot is moving towards.
Mhm.
Is that considered tech debt? That's a great question. Like I honestly don't know if I agree, yes or no, but I'm intrigued and it's thoughtful. Are you thinking it's tech debt because it's back to the essentially because it's not going to be used anymore? Is that the bottom line of that it's kind of junk debt? It's not going to be used anymore or
Um,
scalable?
it's scalable. It's that whole piece. Something that you have that was scalable is no longer scalable. Something in it has to be refactored to be able to make it scalable again. So I think, to me, in my understanding of tech debt, and out of all the definitions, the one that resonates to me is, again, deciding on whether this is something that's still scalable or not. If you start creating a custom object where you create fields, contact first name 1, contact first name 2, contact first name 3, and you're creating those fields instead of considering a proper junction object or whatever it is, that if you're going to have to go back and address that at some point, that is considered tech debt. So anything that is, that questions the scalability of something could push it into tech debt. Whether it's old code that's not supported, right? That is no longer supported, or different functionalities in Salesforce that's no longer supported. The second that Salesforce put an end of life in workflows and process builders, that all immediately became tech debt. In my eyes, similar with profiles, which they kind of put an end of life, then they took it out, and I guess they're putting it back on. I don't know where Salesforce sits with it nowadays, but profiles, companies that have built their orgs on having different profiles for different users and all of these things, and now they're pushing more towards a permission set type of approach. All of those profiles are now, if they decide to pull through with it, could be considered tech debt. So at least that's how I see, how I understand it, the definition to work.
I think so. I think if I see two different buckets, one that you just mentioned, I think is the platform or the software or like a Salesforce, making changes that create automatic tech debt by from a platform perspective, again, like process builder workflows to flows, it's a good example, the permission sets, et cetera, and profiles. But the other way to bring it in is when it's a business change, not a platform change. So, right, if the business comes in and back to the example we were talking about, wants to pivot to different services, different products, et cetera, you have this platform that needs to be updated because it likely won't scale or it likely won't support the need. If there's a budget and a project to take the platform, update it, modify it again in a well thought through, designed way to take it from A to B to support the new products and services, still, would you consider that still tech debt if it goes through the right project cycles and has the right capital budget and the right design changes put in place?
It might not be at that moment, but it certainly could in the future. It absolutely could in the future. For a variety of potential reasons. One, we talked a lot about the functionality becoming obsolete, right? Where some new superseding functionality comes in where it's less taxing on your databases. It's compatible for, I don't know, different integrations, whatever it is the case may be. And it could be tech that's specific to you. For example, if you're using a third-party application that doesn't gel well with what you currently have in place, that could be considered tech debt in some form. I think for me, tech debt, again, it's about the scalability, right? And being able to continue to build on something that remains scalable and achieving something that is as scalable as possible as a company progresses through its needs, through its requirements, resources available to them, whether it's financial, whether it's technological. There's a lot there that, once you can no longer scale with something, then yeah, it ultimately becomes tech debt.
Interesting.
Regardless
And
of the factor.
I guess to maybe back up a tad. So in your mind, when you brought up that the statement, like everything you build in Salesforce is tech debt, I think I'm paraphrasing.
Mm-hmm.
What were your thoughts, or what were your kind of I didn't get to reread the rest of the post this morning. I showed to refresh my memory, but what were you recommending, or what were you, not what your point was, but like what were you trying to get across to the community about there's tech debt everywhere. Everything you do is tech debt. What were you trying to promote or communicate to everybody on how to handle it, how to address it, and what that means to everybody in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I appreciate the question there. I think ultimately what I'm trying to drive across is I've sat on so many meetings across different organizations and the post meetings where people are talking behind other people's back saying, "Oh yeah, we can't get the budget to do this, or you want to do it this way or whatever," and all of these things. And there has to be an understanding of like, hey, here's where we need to find common ground, and we need to put something that's in place right now where we mitigate the tech debt for better or for worse. Whether if we can't deal with all of it right away, or we know this is going to be a problem. Another great example is live chat versus Messenger in-app or web, which is hysterical that they called it Meow. But that's another great example. Like how many people have put in their lives in six-figure implementations to have live chat with Einstein bots and all of these things on top, to only a couple of years ago to be able to say, no, now the new thing is this Messenger and app and web. You all have to migrate, and half of the functionality isn't there yet. That is in live chat is not yet available in Messenger and app and web, and all of your code has to be migrated. All of these things, like immediately live chat became that, and you may only have so many resources. So I think the message to the community is find common ground to find a scalable path forward. You may not get your whole piece of the pie, but work with what we have to be able to put yourselves on the right path, right? So, for example, if it's a Messenger or a Meow migration from live chat, work with the teams to say, hey, here's the resources that we have. Here's what we can hit the ground running with. Let's perhaps have a conversation on what things we can do without, because we're realizing the situation, the limitations of the resources. This new functionality doesn't have everything, but it's the path forward for Salesforce. Salesforce already made this very clear. Let's find a way to get started right now where, we can give up some functionality if we have to, so that way we don't get ourselves in trouble, as opposed to hard coding something right now to just kind of get a spy with something that nobody's proud of. It can kind of work, but just because you're desperate to have something that you had before, as opposed to waiting to have the right tools or the right things, or refactor the right databases or whatever it is that you need to be able to do this the right way in different sprints or phases, right, of a project.
So definitely some thoughts popped up in my head as you were talking through that. I think one of the things I think you're trying to say is that saying like perfection is the killer of progress, or I don't know the exact thing, but when you try to perfect something, you just can't be agile and move fast and get things done because you can never make it perfect.
Absolutely.
I think that's one thing you're trying to say, right?
Yeah, don't let great get in the way of good.
That's what it is. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing that I think you're saying is the Salesforce ecosystem and technology is moving so fast. So even if you do perfect something today, it's likely going to change again, like the profiles, permission sets, process builder, workflows, etc. And so why spend all the time perfecting it when you know that the technology and Salesforce is changing constantly, and it's likely going to have to be reworked anyway? I think, is that kind of the couple of things you're trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. It's, yes, but I don't think it even needs to be elaborated further, right? You hit
Yeah.
the nail on the head. Don't let great get in the way of good. Just deal with the cards that you have, and try as best as you can to put yourself in a path that allows you to build upon it, right? And every now and then you'll need a course correct because of technology, because of budgets, because of whatever, and just course correct. It's impossible to avoid course correction. There's some external factor that's going to come and play into the situation that is going to force you to make a decision or make a move, or that's going to undo, right, some of the progress that you've made. Trying to account for all of that is only going to get you in trouble in the long run.
Right. And I think I agree for the most part as well. I think it's a scale, right? If you are like a B2B SaaS company, you're starting up, you're getting, you're agile, you're moving fast, the company's growing, right? I think that's one scenario. And then one kind of extreme, or a small business. The other extreme is there's some industries like maybe financial, telecom, regulated industries where they probably do need to be a little more buttoned up and designed and locked down pretty well. It has to work. It has to somewhat scale. Security is paramount for like financial information, PII, medical systems, health systems. Would you maybe agree that it also depends on the industry, the platform, and it's like maybe a scale on how you can apply those methodologies or those frameworks on how to handle tech debt?
That's a very, very valid point. Absolutely. I think it's just one of those things that you also have to keep in consideration. And like you mentioned, some industries are much tougher than others. I'm definitely learning about that when it comes to like regulatory compliance. Just because a tool can do something in a certain way doesn't mean that you can get away with doing it something in a certain way, whether it's how you store data or permissions and profiles and all of these things. Like all of these things can come into play that you may have to consider. And again, regulation gets passed that you can no longer do something, but your tool does it. You may have to change it around based on, data sensitivity or privacy. These are all things that, hey, you built it perfectly the first time around, but now it's something you need to refactor, and it's no longer scalable to proceed that way.
Yep. And I think back to your touching on it as well. I think tech debt is not sexy. People with the purse strings do not want to pay for tech debt or expense or refixing things. So it's definitely, you have to get creative, right, with budgeting and how you tackle it. How do you go about managing tech debt for teams that you run, and what's your approach to, ongoing quarter after quarter, month after month, and with your team? How do you tackle it?
There's a lot to it, and I will be the first one to confess that I'm not perfect at it. It still happens if anyone's coming here and trying to listen to me say, here's the one way out of tech debt for the rest of your life. That's spare you the rest of the podcast. But
right.
I think it comes with setting a lot of expectations, right? And making sure that you can deliver as much value as you can to the business. You definitely don't want to stall the business. The business has ideas. They want to have things done. If they come at you with something like a great idea that, from a business sense makes all the sense in the world, they're like, oh yeah, just create this checkbox field here or whatever it is, that common scenario that you're just like immediately feeling bad about something. It's perfectly fine to push back and say, listen, how urgent is this for you? Like, my experience, people will come with urgency, but there's always a new fire. There's always a new thing. I think the first thing is really establishing how big the impact is this really going to be in the business for us to put our time resources on it. And what's the realistic effort to do this right? And is there a way that we can piecemeal this where we can start somewhere and then kind of build them on top of it? Having those types of conversations, having those types of questions, I think are really important. And then when it comes to handling tech debt and trying to get buy-in to go back and look at this tech debt, I think that one, you have to build a business case. The people you're typically having conversations about tech debt with are not technical people. That's
Right.
one of the key reasons that you have to deal with. So you have to speak their language, and typically that's numbers. So if a salesperson wants you to do something in a certain way, okay, how much extra business is this going to develop? How much extra efficiency or productivity? And meaning, okay, let's talk your language. How many opportunities are you dealing with right now? How many opportunities can a salesperson realistically, have in their pipeline before things just start falling through the cracks left and right? Okay, if we do this, can we increase that number to maybe from 8 opportunities to 10 or from 50 opportunities to 60? Okay, what's the average opportunity sales price? Okay, so you're saying we can increase by 10 opportunities per month. And the average price is this. Here's the X value that you've derived. Let's call it 100,000. All right. Does it make sense to spend 80,000 to fix this and do this the right way? Right. And start building those cases to help them understand, okay, all right, now I can justify whether it's the spend or whether it's this thing. Sometimes it'll have to be cross-functional. There'll be multiple departments at play, whether it's like sales and customer success or sales and customer service. Right, that will have to come into play, and you'll have to find some wins for both sides to be able to argue, say, hey, this is going to be painful, but here's what you're going to get out of this, and here's what you're going to get out of this, right? So next time that you're going to go knocking on customer ABC, before you go knocking and trying to sell them on the next best thing that we're about to roll out, have you looked at it? Do you have alerts to tell you, hey, here are all the open cases that you have? Do you have that visibility to have that all properly together? So it's about kind of winning them over by speaking their language. And because if you start getting into, oh yeah, this code is garbage and this or whatever, and this is, like this needs to be redone, that's not their language. That's not the language they're speaking. And you're just really going to struggle to make your case unless you kind of elevate it to the conversation, to the language that they speak, right? And understand. So that way you can really try to get that point across.
Yep, it makes sense. And I think back to the post, to come in with another angle that I had that I think garnered the most reaction, at least on the post, when I was like, hey, I couldn't disagree more with the statement. Again, you're definitely influencing a lot of my thoughts today and opening my mind for sure. But one of the things I wanted to get your thoughts on this is what I sensed and what the feedback I got from the community, the LinkedIn community, was something I mentioned around perception and quality and people's reputation. So one of the aspects, which is like quality, right? And managing speed and not overthinking things and over designing things, to balancing that against, is this a good Salesforce team? Are they building like quality stuff? Is this thing scaling the right way? Are they actually thoughtful in their design? As a business, am I happy with this consultancy, this partner? Because every time they build something, it seems to go fast and break 6 months later. And I think that was part of the angle I was coming from, is how do you balance moving fast, knowing things might not be designed 100% the right way or thought through, with still keeping the perception that this team knows what they're doing. They're good at what they do. This thing has been solid from day one. And balancing those two things, I think that was one of the things that garnered the most reaction from my feedback.
One of the key things, and I've been trying to find the best way to express this feeling, but the best that I can think of right now is I'm here, whether it's as a director of CRM or someone that's running a Salesforce team, be it on the VP of RevOps side, whatever. I'm actually here to slow you down a bit. And I know that this may be controversial to hear for, as a business leader. I'm here to make you think a little bit, to say, listen, what I'm asking for, is that the best way forward? You have a good idea of how to drive business impact, but how you initially envisioned it, of the actual mechanics of it, is that the best way to move forward? So in some ways, as a leader of business systems or as a leader of IT, it's really kind of being able to start peeling a couple of the layers of the onion off, to be able to properly understand, let me understand what you're trying to get at, and I can get back at you with the best way forward. Like, let me understand the resources that I have at my disposal, and then I can come back on a way forward, whether we do it, in certain steps, whether we can do it all at once, or whether we need to think about it a different way to drive that impact. But leave the technology me, right? And let me see what I can have with whatever wireframe you're coming at me, whatever back of the napkin drawing that you've come up with, and let's find a way to put that forward and execute that. I can guarantee you that if you're wondering whether a Salesforce team is good or not, I can guarantee you don't have a good Salesforce team if they say yes to everything, like almost right away. Because if you deliver on absolutely everything, nothing's ever going to connect to each other. So having that ability to kind of, again, think about it. How do I apply this in a scalable way? How do I apply this in a way that works with everything else that we're building, and make sure that doesn't affect any other departments also responsible or also using for the same systems? So those are the kind of things that you have to, I suppose, take into consideration when you're trying to work with business leaders, right? And trying to build solutions. And if you want to deliver on speed, I think one of the key things that I've always said, and I know I've made some, I guess, very popular LinkedIn posts that got a lot of traction, but it's, you can either tell me how fast you want something delivered by, or you can tell me what exactly you want delivered. You can't have both. No, my line of defense will always be, if you're telling me I have to put a solution within, 2 weeks, then I reserve the right to tell you what I can deliver to you in 2 weeks. But if you want something that has, Santa's entire Christmas shopping list in it, then I reserve the right to tell you when I can get that delivered by. And, there's the whole conversation on whether business leaders will respect or not respect that way of operating. But you have to kind of just set the ground to say, listen, there's a path forward here, and we have to lead one that we can continue to build right on top of each building block, and not just derail everything because we found a new shiny object that we want to follow.
That makes sense. I haven't heard that phrase that way, but like, your role is to slow the business down a little bit. And it sounds like you're setting expectations up front as well. Close communication with the business, setting the expectations. Hey, if you want us to throw this in 2 weeks, you can expect some things to maybe go a little haywire, like here or there, and having those close dialogues back and forth, setting expectations, letting them know up front, like what you mentioned, you can do it fast or done well, etc. That's good. That's actually good advice for people to hear as well, that are like in leadership positions.
If I can add one more thing in there as well, because it's times it takes a little bit of trust to be able to shell out, these kind of sentences to business leaders saying, I tell you when you get to have your toys, or it takes building trust. So for folks that are just starting out or just getting in positions of leadership, one of the key things is to build that trust and try to find easy wins that won't derail your entire thing, but like keep an eye out. Sometimes, especially if you're jumping in a new company, there will be things out there that you can easily refactor that folks will value. Have those conversations early on to try to see what are the easy wins, the easy pickings that you can just deliver on things of value, so you can start building a track record of trust in delivering value and results to the other business departments. So that way, when the big one comes, whether it's a whole MDM project or like it's like an entirely new, re-architecture project or something like that comes in play, that you have kind of laid out a couple of breadcrumbs of building trust with leaders to say, listen, if we're going to do this, we need to do this right. I understand you want to have this in a month. This is far more than a month. So we can start laying the groundwork and deliver a little bit to that in a month, or we can put in the proper resources and all of these things to be able to, kind of go the long way. And then, whatever 6 months or however long we need, then we take the time to deliver on that. So it's important to also work on building that trust early on and find those easy opportunities to build that groundwork, because it'll come in handy. And I know that I've had to count on CRO support, and it's been fantastic when I was able to say, lean into the CRO or the chief product officer in my past role, where I could just say, listen, I need your help. I need you to put some weight on this, so that way we can kind of and have that ability to work together and influence by not only making logical arguments, but by having delivered previous value, because that way you can go to them and say, listen, I wouldn't come to you if this wasn't important, and I'm delivering value to you. So, help me out here, so that way we can get the right buy-in or whatever it is to get this job done right.
That makes sense. And I think, right, it's well known that there's a ton of tech debt and rescue projects in the Salesforce ecosystem, all the way from partners to internal teams to everybody, right? So what are your thoughts like on the number one or two main, I think I know what you're going to say, what are the number one and two causes of the Salesforce, a lot of Salesforce customers' frustration with the implementation, with who implemented it? It's wrong. We need a rescue project, ton of tech debt. What do you think the main causes are of that?
Use my most commonly used consultant word. Depends. It just depends. I think that ultimately, I think that companies fail to fully grasp what they're getting themselves into. And I don't mean this in a bad way. I think that, again, the value of CRM is there. The value of different technologies are there in most cases. I just think that at times a company wants something right away. And in a salesperson's role, being the vendor that sells the Salesforce licenses or even the implementation partner at times, there will be a certain degree of, we want this contract, we want this project, just sign on a dotted line and let's get started. Whereas at times, and again, in the sales process, many sales leaders will tell you, you don't want to slow down a deal or have them reconsidered. If they're interested right now, take it, let's sign it, let's get it going. And I think that that's definitely a contributing factor that, again, in different situations can play a varying degree of challenges in how a poor implementation can turn out to happen. Now, from a consulting side, there's also the fact that a lot of times assumptions are made that aren't properly verified. Again, you're a consulting firm. You're not the end client. You don't understand every single intricacy and shades of gray that there are in businesses, which are plenty in organizations. And it's foolish to think that you ever will be. You can certainly map out processes to a decent extent, but there's also only a certain amount of budget that clients will be able to allow and allocate for this. So I think, the better consultants tend to do a really good job at bringing a customer into a software implementation environment and say, listen, this is why it's important to dedicate this much time of our proposal or of our scope of work to properly understanding your problems. There's I think it's Einstein that said, if you give me an hour to solve a problem, I'll spend 55 minutes thinking about how to solve it and 5 minutes actually solving it. Like I think that they're building that case for when customers are like, no, we know what we want. Just build. I just want to pay for the build. I think those are some of the key things to be able to set those expectations, right? We talked about scalability, but another key word of mine is setting expectations to be able to help them be successful and put the right things in place. And, I think other things that happen as well, like this one, someone brought up to me and I was like, you know what? It's actually, I've seen so many of these cases and I just never put two and two together. A lot of times, customer will sign up an implementation project and an implementation partner will build a lot of things out in code. And it was known very early on that the company doesn't have a Salesforce developer on staff to maintain that once that's done, yet they still do it. And I think that there is a serious consideration of, should we have built this declaratively? Should we made a push to build this declaratively? Incurring tech debt potentially if it's not the best way to do it, if code was a better way, but in a way at least that the customer would be able to manage it. Or did we potentially do it thinking that we were going to get a managed services agreement to manage this after that, where at that point, did you set the right expectations with the customer that here's the cost of maintaining everything if you're not going to staff yourself with a proper developer to take this work onwards? So there's just so many factors and so many scenarios that could lead to a potentially bad implementation. It's difficult because in my experience, it's so much that can very easily and unintentionally get overlooked, that companies will only find out much later on. What I can say, and I will say this very strongly, is that every time people point the finger at Salesforce and be like, oh, Salesforce is a difficult system to use, or Salesforce, everyone has a poor implementation with Salesforce. I'm like, have you seen the other systems around? Like, have you tried playing with other systems? Because I have. Right. And in the dozen of occasions that I've had to play with different systems, I'm like, this is infinitely worse. Like, at least in Salesforce, you have resources, you have debug logs, you have tools available to you to try to actually find a solution for it. And most of these other solutions are just like, you're on your own, like, good luck. Or there's just no recourse at all. I mean, I've had situations where we had to pay a consultant who was a smaller software company. You literally had to sign a blank check for like, a couple tens of thousands of dollars for an implementation project. They wouldn't give us a deadline. They wouldn't give us anything. And there was no recourse because they own the code. So it was just sitting there and it's like, when is it going to be done? Is it going to be done one day? Okay. And you're tied to that. So I definitely think that it's unfair because it's not a Salesforce specific thing. This whole relationship between poor implementations and the relationship between customers and software and implementation partners and the vendor itself, I think it's a little unfair because it's present everywhere in the tech ecosystem. So maybe Salesforce just gets a rap because, they're a bigger company than others. So they kind of usually have that target painted on their back.
Yeah, and I do think a lot of SMBs, for sure, it's probably more than they need. Maybe a HubSpot or something's a little easier. For like the small businesses, like, I don't know if I need all this stuff. I just need something simple with like one report. I think that's a lot of the causes of it, of the feedback, at least, and frustrations. But I agree. So I know we probably need to wrap up, but would it be fair to say, I think this was such a good conversation. I think I probably have more of a by the book classic definition perspective that I had on tech debt. I think the definition of tech debt needs to be updated. I think it is kind of old. I agree with pretty much everything you said as well. So it's like I almost agree. I agree with you, and I have my own thoughts as well. And it was very interesting perspective to think about it in terms of what you're building. Think about it as tech debt all the time. And it might even just make you rethink how you design things, how you think about things, how you revisit things, and how you build things moving forward. So I thought it was fantastic conversation and definitely made me think a little more about how I approach it, how I think of it, etc.
I appreciate that, John. It was an awesome conversation. I really had a good time having this conversation, and I think it's a conversation that we need to have. I think there's a lot of other controversial topics, just like tech that can get kind of heated out there. But the important thing is to kind of have these conversations and kind of develop, right, what our understandings are as we put things into play. Someone sat down and put a definition together, be it tech debt or whatever it is. How is it faring out, right, in the market or in the environment? And does it still stand, right? Or like you mentioned, does it need to be potentially updated? So it was great to hear out the points that you brought out as well. Like, again, it's just overall good conversation. I hope the folks that are listening get something out of this as well. So yeah, overall, I appreciate you having me on.
Agreed. Yeah, I'm hoping maybe to bring you back for another episode. It was really good. I wish we had more time. But it
Sounds
was
good.
fantastic. All right. Thanks a lot, Eric.
All right, have a good one.
See you.